Hello, hello. I'm doing the K series today at the Hakuhodo showroom. So the K series is actually a pretty short series. There's 19 brushes in total, and most of them are in the B series because there's that good. So if you don't know what the B series is, it's sort of a best hits of all of Hakuhodo's brushes. So a lot of the K series brushes are popular enough that they're in the B series line. So if I read off a name that goes B something 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 instead of K something something something, just know that they're in there for filler because otherwise the K series would only be something like 9 brushes. So let's start with the big powder brush. This is the K002, which has been renamed to the B002. So this is a pure blue squirrel powder brush, and this is one of my favorites. So it has this big wide shape you can use for dusting on bronzer, powder, and it also has this nice tapered tip with this diamond cut shape that you can use for blush or for highlight or for contour, and it's just a really nice versatile brush. It's not very dense. As you can see, it's quite flexible. There's another brush in another series that's also pure blue squirrel in powder that's denser. But this one just flows over skin and curves really, really nicely. And as for some comparisons, this is the G5535. So this goat shape is, or goat brush has pretty much the same shape and size, but because it's goat, it fluffs up more. So if you have very oily skin and you can't really use the B002 for setting powder, I would opt for a goat setting powder instead. And if you still want to use squirrel, you can always set your tacky base first with a more durable brush, and then go in for squirrel brush to do your blush, bronzer, and finishing powder. So this is the G5535, this is the B002, and this is how they stack up. And then I took the liberty of going through some of the other series and looking. So this is the B507. It's mixed hair, and it's slightly smaller. I know some people are going to ask, but they're basically the same shape, scaled down a little bit. And of course, this one's going to be more resilient because of the goat hair mixed in. You can see how quickly this one comes back versus this one. But all said and done, it's not super airy and quite resilient for a squirrel brush. And then this is the I206. This is in their squirrel simulant synthetic. And again, you have this sort of approximately the same size and shape. This one is a little bit thicker down here, but it still comes to this tapered tip. And this one does feel very, very resilient, but the tips are still very flexible. So if you instead wanted to use a synthetic brush to set your powder, this is the one to choose, the I206. And then I know some people have been asking for synthetic because they feel bad about washing their natural hair brushes often. They're them. And then to give you an idea of how much blue squirrel fluffs up or does not, this is one that's been kept in a brush guard, and this is one that hasn't been kept in a brush guard. So you still really get that tip. It just only comes out a little bit more and becomes a bit more rounded in the fullest part. But yes, squirrel keeps its shape fairly well. As opposed to this, I would expect it to maybe add 20% to the volume. And there's a goat powder brush in the K series. This is a K022. And this is a powder brush or a very big blush brush, depending on your preference. So you can see how much it splays out. This one is fairly unique in the line in that it doesn't have this sort of diamond taper tip. This one has a, I wouldn't call it a flattened dome, but it's more of a true dome. But compared to a more tapered dome, this is the B110. You can see how the B110 has this taper to it. It's not quite a diamond chisel because once the 110 fluffs up, it kind of loses it and becomes a dome. But I expect that the K002 fluffs up quite a bit as well and will become more like the 110. But this is the K002 in comparison to the B110. And you can see with the size difference, it's not that much longer. But because you have this square, rounded off square tip rather than this completely rounded tip here, it will have more volume. So this is the spread on this one. And this is the spread on the 022. So having that square tip with the rounded corners makes a pretty big difference in how much area it ends up covering. And then, so this one will be good for blush or target bronzer or bronzer. And it's also just good for target setting powder. You can't really get it into the corner of the eyes, but you can get the T-zone. And just for comparison's sake, I pulled the I110 as well. This one, for some reason, does not have as much of the diamond taper as the goat does. So if you're looking for a synthetic domed small powder brush, the I110 would be something to consider. Go. Moving on into the blush / highlight. This is the K020. So they basically took the 002 and scaled it down. So big, medium. Here you go. Big versus medium. So this would make a very good blush brush, as well as if you turn it on its side, a highlight brush or a contour brush. And then because of that tip, you can get it through the nose and eye socket and through the temples. So the K020 in comparison to the K008, so the 020 is blue squirrel and the 008 is pine squirrel. The ferrule on the 020 is thicker. There's more hair packed in, and that's because pine squirrel, you can get away with using less hair but still having a lot of bounce. You see how it comes back so quickly? It takes more hair per volume packed in with gray squirrel to achieve the same effect. And the pine squirrel also blends out a lot stronger. So if you want a very strong highlight application, the pine squirrel will be better for that. The gray squirrel will give you a little bit softer of a finish. This is a pretty great brush. I know the big thing is Canadian squirrel versus pine squirrel. Pine squirrel does feel like it has more texture, but also is faster. Both blend very well, but pine squirrel is it just feels a little bit like there's more there. And it keeps that point really well in comparison to the gray squirrel, as you can see. It has more structure. And so this one, you get even more precise highlight. For example, I wouldn't take the 020 down the nose for highlight, but I definitely would take this one down here, over here, and it's just more precise. And the price difference is only $1 between the two. And I have some other large highlight / blush brushes to compare. Let's start with the G5545. So this is goat and squirrel, and this is how it stacks up against the K020. Pretty much the same size, just a tad shorter. And you can see it fluffs up a little bit more and keeps that point better relative to the pure gray squirrel because of the structure that the goat hair provides. And the most defined of all is the pine squirrel. And then to show you the closest goat version I can find, this is a J0303. And then so the goat fluffs up even more and loses that defined tip a bit more. And it's just almost fluffs up to double the volume of the pine squirrel. Otherwise, size-wise, they're pretty similar. Got to show that. So this is how much the goat squirrel blend splays out. This is how much the squirrel one splays out. Pretty comparable. It's just this one will feel a little bit firmer. These will both feel firmer than the pure gray squirrel, but they're not harsh on your skin by any means. And then we have the 211. This is from the 200 series. This is horse. And in comparison to our K brushes, one. It's the most sleek and has the most resilience to it. So this one spreads out this much in comparison to the pine squirrel, which spreads out this much. So the horse one will definitely be the most firm. And if you use cream or liquid blushes and highlighters, the 211 is the one that I would choose. All right, now we get on to the smaller highlighter brushes. This is the K001. So in comparison to the 008 and the 020, this is how it stacks up. So we're going to discard that one. The 020 is thicker and longer, obviously. So if we were to compare all three, the 002, the 020, and the 001, this is how they stack up size-wise. The 001 is a mix of squirrel and horse. So horse is in there to provide the bounce. Otherwise, you can't have a brush this thin and still have resilience. But as I've kept saying, there being Hakuhodo's horse is extremely soft. So you really don't feel any pokiness whatsoever on the skin. And you get the benefit of that structure to really define and be precise. And then this would be on the smaller side for a blush brush. But if you prefer targeted application of blush, this is definitely good for it, as well as for target powder. And then moving down a size, we have the K023. This one is pure horse, I believe. Yes, this one's pure horse. And then you can see that it's just a little bit shorter, but still has that same long, skinny shape. Going outside the series, this is the G5546. In comparison to the K001, you can see they're about the same length. The difference is the K has this diamond point, while the G5546 has this more rounded point to it. So this one will feel a little bit more full, a little bit more firm, but the main difference is in display. So 5546 versus K001. This one would be a more diffused area of effect highlighter brush if you want it, or if you want that effect. And going back to the K023, the smaller of the highlight brushes, I have the other highlight brushes to compare. So if you want a squirrel version, look to the B116. So the 116 is pure squirrel. It's a little bit smaller. Probably not so suitable as a blush brush as this one would be. But again, excellent as the under eye setting powder or target setting powder. Here is the G5547 in comparison to the K023. So again, that rounded tip, a little bit more full. Here is the 213, which is also horse. I was kind of confused by these two at first. So the 213 is slightly wider, but it's the same, it's about the same length. So the difference is, again, is in the spread. You can see here versus here. Again, they're pretty interchangeable at this size, so pick whichever one you prefer based on price. This is the G5525 in comparison to the 023. Just a little bit fluffier and also wider. Again, this is goat, so if you want to use goat for setting your under eye concealer and you're not too sensitive, you can use this one. And then this is a J116. It's actually the most similar to the K023 because the goat is also quite bouncy, like the horse. Horse being just a tad bit more resilient. I believe this is horse. It might be horse squirrel mix, but this is really nice. Okay. That wraps up the eye. That wraps up the face and cheek brushes, and now we're going to eye brushes. So eye brushes, we have a big one. This is a B021, and this is definitely a base setting brush, or again, target powder or highlight. That's how big this brush is. And then also down here, through here. But otherwise, if you usually put foundation over your eyelids, you take this one and some translucent powder, you swipe it over, and then you take it with the side in some mid-tone color, and then you swipe it through the eye socket and the lid, and then you take the tip, and then you just use this one to apply a little bit of a lid color. So that's how I like to use big brushes. Even though they seem really intimidating, they're not, but they are great and efficient. And another use for these big brushes is if you got a harsh edge, you take this one and you just blend it out and it's gone. And then this is the K006. So in comparison to the B021, yeah, so this is another one of the brushes that was in the K series and got moved to the B series. So pure blue squirrel, pine squirrel. Again, the blue squirrel one is thicker and has more hair packed in, but that's because it needs more hair in there to compensate for the fact it's not as resilient. Meanwhile, the pine squirrel can get away with less hair. This one definitely feels more structured. As a blending brush, I would prefer the B021. As the application brush, I prefer the K006, simply because you put down colors stronger, faster, right away. And just to compare, I have the J021 here, same model, but when you turn it, you can see how that goat hair fluffs up more, and you lose that defined tip shape. And then this is the J021 in goat and synthetic mix, and because of that synthetic mix in there, you have less frizz, less puff, so then you get a more controlled shape in your brush. So these I wouldn't use with cream shadow, but if you're looking for a big brush for using with cream shadow, this J021 in goat and squirrel is great for it. And we have the more mid-sized brush. This is the B004, once the K004. So this one is your true sort of lay down brush. So you can put your lid shadow down here. And once you turn it on its side, you have this nice little smudger type tip that you can use to wrap shadow around the lash line, top and bottom, and sort of like connect it for a more hazy effect. This is pine squirrel, so it is strong enough to smudge out pencil liner. I wouldn't use it for applying cream shadow, but if I have pencil liner, I have no problems with using pine squirrel to smudge out because I have seen it used in wet brushes before. So you can see because of that, it works quite well. And then this is the cousin to the all goat B004. So again, same size, same shape. The goat is only a tad bit fluffier because at this size, it doesn't have as drastic of a difference. The squirrel does feel softer than the goat, but both are very soft, and the goat does bounce back a little bit more. I would use the goat for cream shadow and also for spot concealing around the face. Like if I had a blemish, I would take a little bit, pat it, and then it would just apply and blend out. Not so with the pine squirrel. And then we also have the J004, which is all horse. And then this, again, not super huge of a difference. The difference is this one, probably the B004, probably does not handle cream shadow as well as the J004 is, which will put it down in a pretty opaque layer. And then we have the angled brushes. So I'm going to go in order of hard, medium, soft. So the K016 is hog, and it feels like if someone took plastic grass like AstroTurf and put it into a brush. It's extremely stiff, and if you can hear it. If you're doing extreme makeup where you like have to redraw the eyebrow in cream, this would be good for it. But otherwise, I think most people will enjoy the B015 or the K026. The B015 is Badger and has a good amount of spring to it, and this is what most people will use for either powder or pomade filling, and this is why it's in the B series. It's the most versatile and the most well-loved. The K026 is a little softer. This is all horse. It doesn't have the same resilience that the Badger has. So this one will be better if you're just filling with powder. So if you have like gaps here, like I really should be filling that part with powder to just make it look like a soft shadow and sort of smudge it around to make the brows look fuller. That's what the K026 would be better for. Okay, now we're getting into brows and lashes. So we have the K028 and the B028. They're both made of horse on the brush end, and they have this sort of curved comb with guards on the end. Tell you the truth, I'm not sure what the difference between the K028 and the B028 are. So pick whichever one you'd like. But when it comes to the difference between the KO28 and the BO29, I do have to say I prefer the BO29 better. This one has a straight cut to the comb side, and it doesn't have the extra guard on the outside, which makes it more versatile because the guard limits where I can use it. So if I try to use it halfway through my lashes, the guard here and here will kind of run in and I can't comb it all the way through, versus with no guard, I can start any place I want on my lash line and comb it through my lashes to separate them. The brush end is exactly the same. So this one you take and you brush it through your brows to kind of fluff them up a little bit after you've kind of applied product to it, so then it looks more natural and like hair. And the only difference between the BO29 and the BO30 is the color. Otherwise, they both have this unguarded straight cut to the comb. And for those of you that are brave enough, there's the metal lash combs. So this is the KO32 and the KO31. Honestly, they look really scary, but you're not using it this way. You're using it facing up or facing down if you have the bottom lashes to comb out. So otherwise, I do prefer this one because it's completely unguarded. So with the one-sided guards, I still do have to maneuver a bit. Like you can see how far out that angle is to be able to get the inner lashes. With this one, I can keep it fairly close to my face all throughout the length of the eyeball. And then you have your choice of black or pink. And so it should come as no surprise that the BO19 is not as preferred for me as the KO32 because it does have guards on it. However, some people might just feel safer with this because it is plastic and because it's not as intimidating looking, though the picks are still, they're still pointed. So here you go. And then the nice thing about this is the ergonomic part where it's angled, so you can keep your hand down here. So if you're resting your elbow on the table, just go and brush it through, versus this one, you kind of have to like move your head a little bit as you move your hand at first. And then the last thing in the K series is a spoolie. Well, actually no, this is the BO13. So brows, apply, blend out, lashes, apply, fan out. That's what this is for. So that was pretty short because the K series is pretty short. I'll be back with the Ogi series and the portable series hopefully in a few minutes. Probably give me about half an hour to prepare. So I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.